So this first reading walks us through the logic and the structure behind the models we use to understand how regional economies work. I think it's one of the clearest introductions of how we go from the simple idea of an export base in a region to the more complex input-output systems that we use in regional science today. The first three readings are fairly similar in their approach. Something I like about the way that this one is written is that it's fairly pedagogical. It's not a research article that you're reading, but it's meant to be sort of like a textbook for you to understand the concepts, kind of building it from the ground up. Um, Now, most policies and investments affect some regions more than others. So there's this spatial component. We talked a little bit about spatial data the past couple weeks. Regional impact models help us measure how a change in one sector ripples through the local economy, how it has a kind of spillover effect onto other industries or other sectors. So these IO models, IO analysis models, um, estimate not just the direct effects, so like the new jobs at the plant that opens, but also indirect and induced effects. So these are like secondary waves of spending and income that follow the creation or the growth of a particular industry. So these models help us answer questions like how much total income will this project generate? Which industries will be affected by this new project? How far will the benefits spread? So this starts with the economic base model. So there's the idea that regional growth depends primarily on export-oriented industries or basic industries that bring in outside income. Non-basic industries like local retail and other sorts of services simply circulate that income internally. Now, this is an older idea, but this was the backbone and the kind of basis of thinking about IO analysis. So starting from there, Shaper moves us into the input-output framework, which expands the model to include all the inter-industry relationships. These are how every sector depends on each other and how changes in one will influence the other. So key contribution here is the discussion of multipliers. So these ratios that tell us how much the total change results from an initial shock. An output multiplier tells us how total regional output changes when demand for one industry's output rises by, say, $1. An income multiplier tells us how much personal income increases in response to that same change. An employer multiplier tells us how many jobs are created in total, so direct, indirect, and induced from a given employment change. These multipliers are the most visible product of regional analysis. They're what you often see in impact studies presented to policymakers. So this is really useful in applied regional economics. So the IO model uses a transaction table that maps all the inter-industry purchases and sales. We tend to break these down into a small number of industries, or we tend to focus on a subset of related industries, because you can imagine if you get to 20, 40, 60, 1,000 different industries, if you want to split it that way, there's a lot to contain and a lot to try to keep track of, which is just too difficult to do and unwieldy to work with. So this article or this text also helps cover how to build these models, which is really important for us. So the author here describes survey-based approaches, so things like collecting data directly from firms, location quotient methods, so adjusting national data for regional use, and hybrid methods that combine both. And this gives researchers and practitioners some ideas of how they can tailor these models even when local data are scarce. And that's something that can be really difficult in regional analysis. Last week, we talked about issues in Ireland where they just didn't have data at the regional level for their analysis. That's very, very common that we don't have really good detailed data. So working around those data limitations is very important.